I feel like what activated me, just, the things that are going on politically, socially, that are tied to my identity as a Black male, and just seeing what's going on. I felt like, having a platform where I can just express myself. And I like to do poetry as well. That's something I forgot to mention about myself, but I love poetry. And that allows me, an outlet that allows me to express myself creatively, artistically. And as Nina Simone said, um, an artist's duty is to reflect the times, right? Reflect the time
Mhm.
in which we live in. So I felt that necessary, that taking in criminalization, brutalization, the marginalization, and the commercialization of Black bodies and people of color to kind of use my art of poetry, writing, and also podcasting to speak to social justice and these enduring issues. When I did that first episode, I was thinking, hey, these are different topics I could talk about for mental health. Maybe I could talk about neurodiversity, which I want to probably discover in, a newer episode or whatnot, and just different topics I could talk about and relate to. And at that time, I was struggling a little bit with my mental health and I wanted to kind of unpack it also to like driving in my personal experience because I feel that like comics in a way, yeah, they're fictional or not, but they're also relatable. You have I don't know if you've seen The Boys, but The Boys, it's political, talking about our current politics right now and our current state of affairs with that. The X-Men has always been political. But I hate when people say, oh, comics are woke or always been like, comics have always been woke.
Mhm.
Comics have always been
Mhm.
personal, political, emotional, social. They've always been that way. The X-Men, for example, my favorite superhero team, have always been an allegory for racial relation, discrimination, bigotry. They've always been like that. Always been like that. And that's what I don't like when people say that. Superman, for example, and everybody's like, oh, Superman would be conservative and Superman, oh, wouldn't support what's going on right now with like, immigration policies and racism. Like, he would support it. And I'm like, he wouldn't. And there's different panels, examples that show that, he himself, if we're being real, Superman himself is an immigrant. It's from a different planet. And saying that he would be, he would greenlight what's going on now with the ICE raids and our current state of politics. It's just like, really, you're not a comic book fan. You're not a fan of the character. Not knowing what his core intention and inherent values are. Going back to The Boys with Homelander, he is the embodiment from down to his appearance, blonde hair, blue eyes. And from his core values, he is the inherent definition of what white supremacy represents. When you had him literally being in a relationship with Stormfront, I'm like, and then people are just realizing that now when you didn't realize it back then, literally. And I'm like, okay, I feel like comics have always been a modern mythology. I use those as a frame to look through real world issues or just different themes, messages, and I use it to encode it. We all have stories to tell, no matter, what they are. And, I want to tell a story through something that I love. That was kind of my inspiration for the Masculinity and how it started. I kind of came up with the name and then thought to include the poem Bipolar Lawrence Dunbar. I feel like as a society, we all wear masks to survive, to heal, to hide, to laugh. And I think that's what inspired me, just thinking of that, like that concept. And then, like to connect the dots, the poem Bipolar Lawrence Dunbar kind of solidify that and like listening and reciting that poem kind of has some meaning to me. And I could definitely relate to that. I'm sure everybody can from what he was saying.
This is Social Justice Origin Stories. I'm your host, Rolando Thompkins-Jones. Social Justice Origin Stories is a storytelling project that highlights personal stories and defining moments that have inspired individuals and organizations to labor for equity and social justice. Through truth-telling, the honest sharing of their experiences, storytellers teach us about themselves, enabling us to learn about ourselves and our world through their stories. By reconnecting with pivotal moments of activation in their lives, they invite us to do the same. At Social Justice Origin Stories, we believe that there's power in storytelling and lived experience is experience. There's room enough for all of us to do this work. There are many ways to contribute, and our contributions don't need to be the same. We can enter and remain engaged in the work using the gifts that are special to us while supporting others and using theirs. We have the capacity to grow and change for the better when exposed to new information and experiences. We believe in our inherent worth and capabilities, and we possess the power to inspire and create change within ourselves and others. We can transcend the confines of the status quo to imagine and design more equitable and humanizing systems. Thank you all for joining us. Today we have with us Quincy M. Simmons. Quincy M. Simmons, we're going to be talking about his podcast, The Mask We Wear, which I think is really important, really necessary, really exciting in many ways in terms of just how I've experienced it and the impact that it already has, but the potential that it has to grow even more and reach more people. So we'll be talking a little bit about that today. Sometimes when I talk about the storytelling of social justice origin stories, it starts with I started asking people that I know in my life to share their stories and then having them reach out and recommend folks to talk with me. And then sometimes folks reach out to me too, and I'm making new connections as a result of doing this. So this is just another reminder to folks out there who, you might have ideas on the shelf or something sort of percolating, is to just take those actions and to act on that thing that you're dreaming and that you're imagining. And, who knows what kind of cool connections will come out of that.
So, Quincy Simmons, I am a rising senior at SUNY New Paltz, majoring in journalism, minoring in film and video and Black studies. I love comics, love to listen to a lot of old school music, a lot of like 80s, 90s music more so or not. And I'm open to any type of music, whether it's R&B, hip hop, rock, pop. I'm just open to anything, whatever, sounds good in your ear. That's the thing similar with comics, that music is universal. It's emotional, it's therapeutic. And similar to comics like that, I like to work out. I like to travel. These are all things that make us unique, and these are things that make me me.
Yeah, happy to have you here. Really appreciate you. So we're going to talk a little bit about The Mask We Wear and a little bit into your own origin story as well. One of the things I'm curious about is, how did you find me in the first place? And what encouraged you to reach out?
Yeah, so I had reached out because I did a previous episode for The Mask We Wear called Men, Mental Health, and the Superhero Complex. And I had Dr. Keith Edwards on there. And, I had followed him on LinkedIn. And then I believe he had reposted one of your videos, and he had also did an episode with you. And I was like, oh, wow, like I'm really checking this out. I'm really digging this. And it was really great. And then I started to dig and saw other episodes you did with people and talking with everybody, whether it's like regarding neurodiversity, racial experiences, education. It incorporated a lot of stuff. And I was thinking that you and what you talk about in your podcast is very powerful and paramount to what's going on right now in our society and today, social issues, your experience in general, and how you got here as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And it's one of those things too, like Keith Edwards, and for folks who are listening, Keith Edwards shared his social justice origin stories with us in a prior episode. Keith was one of those folks that I met and connected with back when I first started posting things online related to social justice and equity, put my voice out there, my thoughts out there, my words out there. He was one of the earlier supporters of some of my early work. And so that's cool to know that there's that connection. And then also, again, I've said it before, like if there are things on your mind or folks you want to reach out to collaborate, to connect, do that thing. And who knows what will come of it. It's great that that happens. Happy to have made this connection and happy that you're here with us. One of the quotes that I often share with guests to kind of get things started, it's a quote from Corey Bush, which said, many of us do not choose to become activists. Instead, we are activated. And so when you think about just your understanding of social justice issues, of understanding injustice, what were some of the things that activated you?
I feel like what activated me, just, the things that are going on politically, socially, that are tied to my identity as a Black male, and just seeing what's going on. I felt like, having a platform where I can just express myself. And I like to do poetry as well. That's something I forgot to mention about myself, but I love poetry, and that allows me, an outlet that allows me to express myself creatively, artistically. And as Nina Simone said, an artist's duty is to reflect the times, right? Reflect the time in which we live in. So I felt that necessary, that taking in criminalization, brutalization, the marginalization, and the commercialization of Black bodies and people of color to kind of use my art of poetry, writing, and also podcasting to speak to social justice and these enduring issues.
So the poetry, the writing, the podcasting, tapping into your creativity, using your voice to reflect the times in a variety of ways. Oh, and I love that you brought Nina Simone in too. You're a journalism student. And so you shared a little bit about what activated you there and that you're very talented in these different ways. You're minoring in film and video and Black studies. What led you to choose journalism as an area of study, and how has that impacted the ways that you use your voice now?
So originally, journalism wasn't originally like my first major. I was thinking about doing computer science back in senior year of high school, and I took a computer science course that year, and I was just really feeling it. And I'm not really a fan of math, science, I take them for the GEs or whatever, the general education, but I wouldn't think about majoring in it. But I feel that because I did poetry, I feel like, and I like to write and just having stories that I want to share, in time, that I'm like, hey, maybe I can tap into my writing. And then, I went to SUNY New Paltz. It has a beautiful journalism program. I looked into that. I talked to someone who also graduated there with journalism. And I was like, hey, why not? Let me take a shot at it. Being that we use our gifts and use what we have to get to where we are. And I was just like, I love to write, because computer science I wasn't really feeling, and that was okay. And I went with journalism, and now I'm just realizing that while I like writing, I also like editing and doing video and sharing stories. So it's kind of like I'm in between those two paths because I love to write, but I also love to edit and do videos. And while both are artistically, I just have both in mind. But that's pretty much what led me to journalism, just seeing the zeal I have for writing and storytelling.
I'm just listening to your podcast episodes, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. One of the things I really appreciate about them is they have and I said this before I even knew you were a journalism student. You reached out to me, or you said at least one episode, and I checked it out. And I'm sitting here and I'm listening to your podcast, and it has and I'm thinking to myself while I'm sitting here listening to it, I'm like, this has a very like journalistic quality to it. Like, I feel like you're incorporating multiple voices, but then you're also being with us at the same time. As I'm experiencing it, it feels like you're supporting listeners and making meaning of some of the things that they're hearing. You're adding additional context and complicating in really good ways the conversation in ways that encourage thought and reflection. And I'm like, wow, I'm listening to your stuff and I'm like, wow, that's something that I want to pick up and want to eventually, as my project grows, want to add in here too, in terms of, that journalistic quality of having a host, somebody that's with you in it. And then you zoom in and you have the conversations, you zoom out and sort of summarize and support folks in better, connecting those dots. And so, yeah, I just thought like, wow, this is incredible. Like, it feels like journalism. I'm a big fan of public media, big fan of audio and video and podcasting and storytelling as well. And I remember thinking this, and at the time I hadn't even known that you were a journalism dude. But then when I looked into your bio a little bit, and I said, oh, journalism. Oh, okay. All right. It's making sense here. I appreciate you sharing that story. So I just want to know, are you picking up some of that in your program, or is it sort of self-taught in some ways, or some combination of the two?
It was some combination of the two. Originally, I did just short things like on slideshows or Google PowerPoint. I kind of did it from there, but then I started to learn how to video edit, especially when adding music into the slideshows. And like I would just, do an MP3 converter, YouTube MP3 converter. Then I would go on like some editing platforms, like I think Audition, and then like just chopping even that up, just starting from there and just adding into my presentations and slideshows. Started from there. And then once I went to college and freshman year, I had this class called digital storytelling. That's really what pulled me into multimedia editing, video editing, audio editing, all of that. And because we dealt with, like, we did a podcast, but we also did a short documentary, and then we did a short film at the end of the course. So I kind of got a little bit of everything in that. And we learned, Adobe, because we primarily work with Adobe Premiere, Adobe Audition, a lot of Adobe related products. And then I picked up DaVinci Resolve, another editing software or whatnot, because this past semester I did an internship with the Writers Read. The Writers Read is a literary arts organization that gives opportunities to writers to showcase their skills, their talents or whatnot. And they would primarily use DaVinci Resolve to edit. And I was really a stranger to DaVinci Resolve, being that I've used Adobe, for all the times and projects that I've done. But it was definitely a learning curve. So that definitely, I feel like for me was self-taught because, I would look up videos of how to do this, of how to put in keyframes, of how to like zoom in and color correction and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. I was just curious about that. It's really great, really well done. Pulling in references from comics and pop culture and exploring archetypes, like a variety of different things to help us make sense of the human experience in many ways. So I really appreciate you answering that question. And I also wanted to let you know that before I had even knew that you were a journalism student, I was just like, I was blown away when I was listening to it. I said, wow, okay, all right. So it's good to know, good to see that. I have a growing interest too in journalism and sort of finding my way towards that path at a later point in life. But yeah, I was just really encouraged even just by listening to your work. So just wanted you to know that from me. So tell us about the origin story of the masks we wear. What were you noticing, experiencing, and what were some of the events that led you to say, all right, this is something that I want to do? This is something that would be beneficial for folks to hear. What led you to begin and create the mask we wear?
So originally, the mask we wear started out as a school project. For this past semester, I was in a class called Revolutionary Representation with award-winning journalist Nora Tajori, and she wanted us to do like a rep project because she also runs a podcast called Rep, a story about the stories we tell. And she uses politics, social issues, and her origin story too as a frame to look through different issues as a Muslim American, a Libyan American. She looked, as that as a frame. So I was interested within that podcast and that pulled me in. But she had us do a project in any medium, like whether it was writing, video, audio, like a podcast, or even drawings, artwork. And I chose to do mine in a podcast. And at the first time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But she was like, everybody has a story to tell. And my mother also tells me that. And definitely that inspiration from my mom saying, we all have stories to tell, beautiful stories, encouraged me to, hey, I love comic books. And I feel like we all have a story to tell. And I started having people listen to this project. They were like, hey, why don't you make it into a series? Why not do that? Right. And I was like, hey, like, yeah, I should. When I did that first episode, I was thinking, hey, these are different topics I could talk about for mental health. Maybe I could talk about neurodiversity, which I want to probably discover in, a newer episode or whatnot, and just different topics I could talk about and relate to. And at that time, I was struggling a little bit with my mental health and I wanted to kind of unpack it also to like driving in my personal experience because I feel that like comics in a way, yeah, they're fictional or not, but they're also relatable. You have I don't know if you've seen The Boys, but The Boys, it's political, talking about our current politics right now and our current state of affairs with that. The X-Men has always been political because I hate when people say, I guess, oh, comics are woke or always been like, comics have always been woke.
Mhm.
Comics have always been
Mhm.
personal, political, emotional, social. They've always been that way. The X-Men, for example, my favorite superhero team, have always been an allegory for racial relation, discrimination, bigotry. They've always been like that. Always been like that. And that's what I don't like when people say that. But anyway, going back to that, the project happened. My professor, she liked it. And she even said the same thing. You should turn this into a series, And at first I was a little hesitant because as a content creator, I know you have to be up and on it and constantly posting things, but also knowing that, hey, you give yourself time to just refresh, reset, recharge, and relax. Right? So I was like, yeah, I'll do this. And I followed through with it because I felt that we all have stories to tell, no matter, what they are. And, I want to tell a story through something that I love, which is comic books and anime and manga, which I'm starting to dive into really now. That was kind of my inspiration for the mask we wear and how it started.
I appreciate your sharing there. And in particular, that feeling of being a content creator and you got to be up and posting and doing all the things. I was actually just listening to one of your episodes before we started. It's one of those things that I'm keeping in mind to this idea of heroes and villains and to what extent villains are created by our society. And you all are having a really complex conversation with multiple people. I love how you incorporate multiple voices in your narratives. in your storytelling, which I think is really important to support listeners and hearing a variety of different vantage points and perspectives. But one of the things I remember hearing as you were signing off, though, was like, oh, I'm going to take some time over the summer to rest and recharge. What do you say? Relax, rest, recharge,
I reset and recharge.
refresh, reset, and recharge. And I appreciated hearing that because I do think there is that aspect of content creation where you got to be like out and doing the stuff. And also, it is important to refresh and recharge. I just appreciated you naming that because as you shared that, I'm like, yeah. And, with TikTok and stuff, and I'm in some ways, perhaps, who knows, maybe it's generational, maybe it's different. But I do recognize there's a sort of pace to content creation and production. And then I'm also a fan of long form. And I think people still love long form narratives and finding your audience and you sharing your voice. There'll be an audience for it who'll do it. And people who will wait, because I'm like, all right, you're talking directly to the people that are listening. All right, y'all may. And I appreciate it. It was something like, if time or life allows or something, you might see an episode or two from me, or you might hear an episode or two from me, but here's what I'm doing for myself. I think it's modeling. And then also I do feel like, there's still an audience out there for folks who are willing to wait for that quality in the content that you have, and they'll be there. But I do recognize also there's so much like posting all the time. I got to be with it everywhere. But I'm trying to put an affirmation. I'm trying to be affirmative here and sharing with you, but I appreciate you naming that statement. And for me, it was just like, all right, it's interrupting the flow of that a little bit in ways that I think are still really necessary. Because, 24/7, always doing it. Where's our time to reflect? Where's our time to like think about, all right, so here's what I did. Where do I want things to go? What, voices or what pieces might be missing, like those types of things. So I saw that in a way as modeling. I saw it as leadership too. Just that statement of like, yeah, all right, y'all. Thanks for listening. And I'm taking some time off and, I'm still around. So I just appreciated that. I heard what you said there and I wanted to hear you say a little bit more about it when you mentioned the X-Men, you mentioned the boys and, folks complaining about comic books being too woke right now. I'm hearing a lot of complaints right now about Ironheart. I'm hearing a lot of critiques and it's like, really, one, have y'all read the comic books? Do y'all understand the story and the history behind it? Because a lot of these statements, if you're saying them, if you actually looked at the material, you would realize that we've always been having these conversations. I appreciate like how you said about X-Men, just hearing conversations around, critiques of the boys being woke. And it's intentionally designed to have folks look at the society that we are in. And actually, there are some instances with the boys in particular where some folks didn't realize that they were talking about us until a certain point. It's like, oh, I didn't know all this time y'all were actually critiquing white supremacy and all these things. If you could say a little bit more your thoughts on how you don't like when people talk about like comic books are too woke.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Ironheart. I've seen like the reviews and a lot of people saying it's very good. And then you have some people like when I think they were doing the trailer, I guess, release or whatnot, and people like break down the trailer and watch it. And like a lot of like, I think it was this YouTube channel, Nerdy or whatever it's called, or something like that. And they were making fun of it and just making all types of racist jokes and stuff like that. And I was like, whatever, like you obviously don't understand the character. And we could also talk about mantles with, Sam as Captain America and, Miles as Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And like with all these things, these are mantles. These are mantles. And like anybody could be a Captain America, a Spider-Man, an Iron Man. But in this case, it's Ironheart. She's her own identity. She's not living under Tony's shadow. Yes, she's mentored by Tony. She's advised by Tony, in the comics, obviously. But I mean, it's a whole different character, and I guess not wanting to see the success of a Black female, the genius, the intelligence, the joy. And I guess, and a lot of times we're supposed to be portrayed as like hard, heavy, and it's supposed to be like, it's just like breaking down barriers and stereotypes is what I also want to focus on in my show. And just seeing how different systems use that. When people say, oh, comics like are woke or, oh, they're just like, they're not, I'm like, comics have always been that way. Have always been that way. Superman, for example, and everybody's like, oh, Superman would be conservative and Superman, wouldn't support what's going on right now with like, immigration policies and racism. Like, he would support it. And I'm like, he wouldn't. And there's different panels, examples that show that, he himself, if we're being real, Superman himself is an immigrant. It's from a different planet. And saying that he would be, he would greenlight what's going on now with the ICE raids and our current state of politics. It's just like, really, you're not a comic book fan. You're not a fan of the character. Not knowing what his core intention and inherent values are. And then saying, and especially what kills me is that it's fans of the characters themselves saying that they definitely be down for this. They would definitely greenlight them. Going back to The Boys with Homelander, he is the embodiment from down to his appearance, blonde hair, blue eyes. And from his core values, he is the inherent definition of what white supremacy represents. When you had him literally being in a relationship with Stormfront, I'm like, and then people are just realizing that now when you didn't realize it back then, literally. And I'm like, okay, I feel like comics have always been a modern mythology, as the Greek gods and the Roman gods had their form of mythology and stories and fables. This is our modern mythology, comic books, manga. I use those as a frame to look through real world issues or just different themes, messages, and I use it to encode it. And that's what I love about the show. And I'm thinking about maybe doing a subsection of the show where I break down certain comics and just explain that and do maybe kind of a review like thing. But anyway, going back to that, I feel that comics have always been woke and a modern mythology, something that we could look to and look at. And since you mentioned the X-Men, I love the X-Men because of what they represent. And, one of my favorite villains in fiction, Magneto. And yes, I understand, while we don't like what he does, at the end of the day, you got to admit he dropped some tough bars, number one, and he's not lying, and you can see where he's coming from. I like to call villains like him villains with justifiable motives, because he's not just pure evil like Palpatine. He was broken. You see that through his experience as a Holocaust survivor, and him trying to make sure that mutants or whatnot don't suffer the same way he did. Whenever he's talking, he comes with a message. He comes with something, and that's what I like about his character, because you got to be like, well, he does have a point. There's a method to his madness in a sense. He tries to prove something. The same with Killmonger from Black Panther. He had the right mindset, kind of like Magneto, but just executed it not in the right way. They have good intentions, but they executed it poorly, unfortunately.
And when you talk about those bars, those one-liners, perhaps you've seen X-Men 97 too, at this point.
Yeah.
And I mean, full of bars, full of real hard, realities in many ways. It's like, I'm trying to live with y'all. I'm trying to do this thing. And y'all refuse to get out of your own way in so many ways. I'm glad you brought up the Homelander Stormfront example too, because that's an example of what I was trying to say earlier of when folks don't realize white supremacy, heterosexism, so many of these systems out here are actually being critiqued in this show. Capitalism, so many of these systems are being critiqued in the show, and they're not realizing it until it's very blatant. It's like, y'all realizing this now when y'all see
That's
it
what
on
I'm saying,
Stormfront,
yeah.
but y'all didn't, from the very beginning, it was critiquing this whole thing. I saw the 1990s X-Men as well, and I look back to those episodes and I see the Friends of Humanity, that FOH hat that people would wear, and I'm like, that's Make America Great Again right there. But are people paying attention to the messages? So like you said, you hear those critiques and it's either you're not really a fan of the character, you don't understand the story, or you haven't been listening this entire time.
Yeah.
For sure. You also focus on mental health, social injustices, toxic masculinity, and discussing ideas of masculinity in particular. What was something that led you to want to focus on that as an area of interest, pulling in characters, culture, and anime in that?
So regarding the mental health realm, as I said before, I've had my own struggles with mental health. And around that time, I've had a lot of friends who have their own stuff with mental health. And being that mental health is definitely a topic I feel like that needs to be addressed more. And I'm glad a lot of people now it's being addressed a lot more with different podcasts, with different promotionals and different stuff. I'm glad it's being addressed more. And I kind of want to address it in my own way, especially as a man, as a Black man. And another thing that I include in that episode is the shy. So they have their own men's circle. And I love that representation, especially in a Black show like that. We as men can come together and talk about mental health because, it's okay not to be okay. That's fine. And I'm glad that it had that representation in the show. But I wanted to talk about it because toxic masculinity is real. A lot of peers that I know and people I know who have struggled with it. And I wanted to focus on that in an episode and talk about that, and unpack that a lot. I wanted to use a lot of characters that kind of embody mental health stories like Daredevil Born Again. Just different characters in the story that show how in life we are tested and we are broken, but it's not about how we fall, it's about how we give up and how we recover. And to show that there is recovery. And that actually brings me to a project that I've done called Resilience and Recovery. It's a short video that I did, and it talked about how people rise, recover, and rebuild from mental health. And I just went around and interviewed a lot of my friends and peers, and, they shared their stories. And, because photos are powerful. As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And just like with comics and books and TV shows, you could break down and encode messages through photos. And, this was for another class project from the fall semester of my junior year. And that's what I ended up doing for my project and focusing on the mental health tip of things.
There's somewhat of a theme here of these things starting off as projects, but then growing into something more. I'm curious if, I know you mentioned earlier letting some people hear your project and then later at that point getting some feedback around like, oh, this could be a series or this could grow into something. Did you at any time have any voices of doubt around your projects? And if you did, how did you navigate that and decide to continue anyway? Or if you didn't, what are some of the things that supported you in that? The reason why I'm asking that question, sometimes, well, I'll just say for me, I'm glad Social Justice Origin Stories got off the ground and I'm getting a lot of great feedback about it. There was a little point in time where I was just kind of like, oh, is this something that people could relate to? Is this something that people would be interested in? Only to find out later, it's like, oh, it's great. Like, why, of course, yes, and that's great. It's been a really great connecting force for people. But yeah, did you at any point in time experience any of those voices of doubt? I know some creatives out there, whether it's poetry or working with another friend of mine who is into rapping and poetry and different things. And, just describing sometimes like different pieces of art, it's like when you're sharing it with somebody from, it's you letting a piece of yourself go. Some people have that feeling, right? And there's some vulnerability around that. And so I'm just curious if you ever had any wonderings about or not. It's okay if you haven't either, but I'm just curious if you had any of those voices kind of creep in.
Yeah. Well, in the initial start, I had a lot of people for it, but as the episode started coming out, I think it was episode 2 where I had the mental health episode about, and I just wanted to share with people to see what they thought. And agreeing with your point before I get into this, I did think to myself, like comic book series, manga, no one is really into that. And like people did end up liking it. And even non-comic book, non-manga anime fans ended up liking it because behind it, it had a message behind it. And this is why you could use these types of modern mythology to encode stuff and draw it back to reality. But when episode 2 released, I was sending it out to people and I sent it out to somebody or whatnot. They just said, oh, I just thought you could have done this differently or that differently with the presentation of the people you had on there, targeting it to specifically all groups and stuff like that. I'm like, I get that, or demographics and stuff. And why understand that? But, my podcast is for everybody, I look at it as to everybody, not targeted to sports or a specific demographic or group. It's just for everybody to listen to because, at the end of the day, I hope that, my message, my story, our stories can reach out there. But other than that, I wouldn't say I really haven't had voices out. I mean, maybe in a sense, I'll say myself in the beginning when I, was thinking about, hey, maybe making this into a series and thinking like, hey, like I'm not gonna be able to keep up and I'm maybe gonna fall off track. And then I have school going on and I'm an RA and I have all this going on and that may be in the way of that. But, I managed and, I'm grateful that I was able to roll out my first 3 episodes and was able to, manage it through the time and allow myself little times. And, being me, I'm like really have to give myself a pat on the back, being able to, create my own podcast and just roll it out there. And I would just say that in a sense, while it may not be externally a voice telling you internally sometimes, but it could be influenced by the external. Like how I was just like, hey, I don't think I can or whatnot. But, in the sense, like, I know I can do this. If I've done these things in the past, I can do this.
Yeah, school and studies and being an RA, all that, like trying to balance everything and do this. It's really well done. It's really great. And when you share that too, that's one of the things that brings me back to what I was trying to say earlier, is just trying to affirm you in that too. It's like, yeah, everyone's pace is different. There are some shows, some projects where they might release something once a month, once every couple months or whatever. But when you find the folks that you're talking to, they'll come back. Some people might have that post every day kind of thing, different teams and different resources and things around that are different, which kind of leads me to another question around, to degrees that you thought about this, because that was a good example of getting the feedback from the other person. Like, yeah, you could do it this way. And you're like, yeah, I hear that, but I'm trying to design this show for everybody, or for a bunch, for a lot of people. So like, what are some of the things that you keep in mind when it comes to remembering to listen to your own voice and your own sense of direction in terms of doing your projects? I've talked to folks who shared like, all right, once you put it out into the world, other people are going to engage with it. And you may get a lot of different inputs, some of which resonate, some of which don't. But what are some things that come to your mind when you think about the importance of listening to your own voice when it comes to moving this project forward?
For me, to knowing that, like, people don't run you, you run yourself, and you're in charge of your own, fate and destiny. And that kind of just influenced me to, hey, like, kind of block out all the noise, filter out all, like, the melodrama and all of that, and just to know, hey, like, to do what, you're capable of doing. And that's what influenced me to keep on going with it and to believe in myself and to create the mask you wear.
That was one of the reasons I really just appreciated that. It was quick. It was just like, yeah, y'all, I'm taking some time off, and you may hear from me, you may not. Thank you for listening, kind of thing. I'm like, yeah, that's the kind of centering and grounding that is so necessary. I mean, you talk about mental health too, because
Yeah.
if we're operating out of standards that don't match what we're able to do in the current moment, it's like that gap there. Sometimes people can internalize that. So yeah, working at a pace that works for me, you know? Appreciate you sharing that. Is there a specific moment in your process, or it could be an episode or a conversation, where you felt really engaged in the work, or where you felt like, yeah, this is a reminder that, I really believe in this project and it's really making an impact and these stories matter? Is there a specific or it could be moments or feeling or noticing? It could be through having the conversations directly. It could be in the editing, just different parts of your process. But in working with your project, just a moment where you felt like really engaged and really affirmed and like, yeah, this means something. Like this is necessary. I'm on the right path here with doing this.
I would say, like, throughout the whole process, from editing to interviewing people, with even formulating the script in different places. So even just, well, we'll start from scratch. So step one, formulating the script, like what I want to talk about, what content I want to talk about. Just be like, like that sounds good. Drawing the parallels from fiction to reality, and being okay. Then I look up to people and being like, hey, this would be a great person to talk to because they can relate to topic A of what I'm going to talk about in this segment. And then actually talking with people and dialoguing, and that conversation in conjunction with editing, like seeing the different sound bites I get, but also just the art of just talking, having the conversation, being able to relate and explore the, like, hey, I feel that same way too, and just, common ground. I
Yeah.
feel that in each of the processes, and even when the episode releases and I listen to it and I play it back, I'm like, oh, I feel that it does resonate with people. I just feel like in different processes of editing or interviewing, it definitely has me saying, okay, this is really good stuff. And I want to continue. I want to keep this going forward.
Who are some of your influences, like people, or it could be books, things, experiences throughout your life that have influenced and kind of helped to shape how you see the world and approach working for social justice these days? It could be, like you said, comics too.
I would say definitely my mother. She's always told me, like, hey, like, you have a beautiful story to tell. You have a beautiful story. And taking that into account, like saying, as I said before, like, we all have stories to tell. So, why not do that through what I love, which are comics, manga, anime. So she's definitely a person to take into account. I would definitely say my teacher, Professor Nora Tajori, just like for her giving me the willpower and working with her, like, and saying, hey, what should I do with this and what direction I take it in? And her being one of my top supporters when upstarting and taking this project off overnight, and being that I did it within her class, but her really supporting me and pushing me forward and even encouraging me to make it to a series. along with a lot of my other peers who I'd also factor into influencing me, because I feel like the guests themselves, or the guests and the peers who listen, I feel like that they have something to contribute to because they're your audience, but they also can relate to it and resonate with it. So I would say those are my biggest influence too. And a lot of the people who listen to my podcast, in its initial creation. It's definitely like not a hard question, but definitely really the one that gets you to really just think and
Mhm.
I would definitely say there's a lot of comics from I'll just name some out there, from Black by Kwanzaa Sajafo, from Daredevil Born Again to Mr. Miracle by Tom King, which focuses on the mental health tip. And I read it enough to finish, but it's beautiful. From a lot of X-Men comics, E is for Extinction or Days of Future Past, the one with I forgot, but it's with the legacy virus, something like that. But just different ones because at the same time, they're very political, social, emotional.
Mhm.
And I would just say a lot of comics that are political, social, emotional, I feel like those definitely influence me as frameworks that I could use and see issues through.
Always have been political, always have been social, always have been speaking to the times. I was looking at a panel the other day, I forget which one it was. For example, when you see Cyclops getting ready to get into a fight with Captain America, like, where have you been all
Yeah.
this time? Y'all don't really care about us, you know? And so just seeing the parallels to that, there's certain levels of like respectability and acceptability, or you come around where it's convenient, you know what I mean? But it's like we out here, fighting for our lives, hero for who kind of a thing. You know what I mean?
I feel like Captain America is also definitely a double-edged sword type of character because while, he does stand up for the oppressed or not, and we see this in the comics as well, and he see him going against the system when need be or whatnot, and trying to challenge the power structures at play. But then when it comes to mutants, it's
Yep.
like, whoa, hey, this is out of my jurisdiction, out of my territory.
My
And
hands are
even when
tied.
going back to X-Men 97, when Rogue did her thing, and spoilers for anybody who didn't see it, X-Men
Hmm.
97. But when, what happened on Genosha with Gambit, and then she went away to find answers, and then he was on his mission, and then they met up, and she was like, I can't go. It'll send a certain message to this country that, Captain America
Yep.
is out to get them. But they said, oh, well, I thought you stand with us. We came through for you, here and there. But when it's for us, you can't
Yeah.
and I hope we get
Talk.
that in X-Men 97 with Cyclops, especially revolutionary Cyclops, because his character has really not been, I guess, really like zoomed in upon in this show in X-Men 97 because he's been kind of overshadowed by Wolverine. While Wolverine's my favorite character, I want to get to know the other players of the team.
Especially having the context, at least for me, seeing the '90s show and then seeing how they did with Cyclops in this new
Yep.
iteration or this continuation of it. They explore him a little bit more
Yeah.
than they had in ways that I was really happy about. Cyclops is, like, I do agree, he was overshadowed in those early days, but yeah, I think that got rectified in some good ways here. The more I think about it, it just speaks to how you started in the beginning, just underscoring being creative and that bringing in Nita Simone and artists being reflective of the times, this understanding recognition that comics have always been reflective of the times. And then those critiques too. It's like they did it for X-Men, they do it for Marvel, they do it for Star Wars,
Yep.
always
Yeah.
something to say. But do y'all recognize that they're talking about society? So do you have a favorite storyline or comic book or character, or does it change and shift?
Okay, so we're not gonna go deep, but we're gonna go kind of
Yeah.
here. So for Marvel, my favorite now characters, you mean heroes and villains, or you want to know
Yeah, yeah,
heroes,
it could
Okay.
be anybody. Because when you talked about Magneto and Killmonger earlier, I was thinking and I saw a couple of clips of these. I saw a clip that was like, "Oh, this is the hardest speech in Dragon Ball Z ever," and they brought in Vegeta talking about you live your whole life in service of another. You watch your peep dwindle to a handful. Only thing you can focus on is
Yeah.
building your own strength. So I would throw his name in there too among
Oh yeah.
those people. And I feel like we might have touched on that before when we talked offline, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it could be folks who, heroes, so to speak. It could be, folks who have some other complications too. So yeah, it could be anybody. I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll just factor in everybody. I'll just name some names. So for heroes, I don't like kind of really the worldly, Marvel stories or whatnot, or worldly stories in general. I mess with New Gods or not, and obviously space stories like Silver Surfer, the Guardian of the Galaxy. Nah, not really the Guardian of the Galaxy, but Silver Surfer, New Gods from DC. But for characters, I'll say for heroes, just a overall protagonist. I feel like since you brought up Dragon Ball, like Piccolo, Trunks, Gohan, specifically, I'll be specific. The Gohan who went up against Cell and gave Cell a run for his money. That's the Gohan we messing with, or I'm
Okay.
messing with.
Okay.
Future Trunks, future Gohan, Piccolo, and then for anime villains or no, we'll continue on the heroes.
Yeah,
Like,
it could
I
be
like
it could be whatever.
Jiraiya.
Yeah, it could be.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I'm
No,
kind of
that's
nerding
good.
out now.
It's
So, yeah,
expensive. It's expensive, and I'm also like, oh, how much do we go? How much do we not? But no, it's
that's what I'm
expensive, man. And
saying.
this will be
Okay,
one. And people who are listening
okay.
to it, every story, every message resonates with the folks that it resonates with. So you'll have the comic folks who will hear about this, or the manga folks, or the anime folks who come in
Yeah.
and they'll know what we're talking about.
So I feel like, that's for Dragon Ball, Piccolo, Gohan, Future Trunks. I guess for like, Marvel, like, I like Wolverine, I like Daredevil, I like Spider-Man, I like Hulk, characters who kind of are like, optimistic but also misunderstood and trapped in a way. Um, Black Panther's another good one. For DC, I love Nightwing, better than Batman in my opinion, Nightwing. Wally West, Kid Flash, Wally West Flash, Wally West just generally, John Stewart, Static Shock, those are my heroes, my favorite DC heroes. Garner anime, like I like Naruto. I started watching Sakamoto Days. So I like the protagonist in there. I like Jiraiya. Anime protagonist.
Still
I'm trying
sad
to
about
think.
that. Heartbreaking, man.
Man, Jiraiya's my
Heartbreaking,
favorite dude. I like
man.
Kakashi too, and then for I guess also like I like some people in My Hero Academia. I'm not really gonna throw names, but like just like some of the protagonists in there I enjoy too, and like
Okay.
Hunter x Hunter and stuff like that. But as for villains, because I feel like Magneto, Doctor Doom's on there for me, Reverse Flash, Bullseye, especially how they're doing in MCU. Love it.
Oh shit.
I guess Vegeta, Orochimaru, the one above all, or all for one. I think from My Hero Academia. There's a lot you could pull from. I feel like I like the Joker. He's but he's kind of overrated in recent times. There's really a lot you could pull from. Like I'm just trying to scramble for everybody, but like I feel like for me, that's kind of my list. It's kind of all over the place, but I like everything and everybody and everyone. Just like mostly characters, I feel like, or stories that like are kind of optimistic, grounded, but then also have some story to them. And, while they may be, a little dark and edgy at times, but they have some story to them, and that's what I like.
Yeah, I was just curious. Thank you for engaging with me in that. What are some of the overarching hopes that you have for the mask we wear as a project? Like, what's some overarching themes that you hope to communicate to listeners?
I hope that it just communicates that, like, to allow people to, to an extent, unmask and to like allow them to, just be more expressive, be open, and hey, have them, express it whether through a podcast, through art, through something like that, and to promote conversation as well. To have them be able to listen to my podcast or not, and hey, like unpack messages themselves, or maybe be like, or have it like, direct and maneuver their life, in a positive way, in an authentic way, and I hope that it helps that and helps them be able to, do that or not.
Yeah, that's incredible. For folks who are listening now, we were talking offline and getting to know one another. One of the pieces of feedback I shared was just like one of the things I really love about your podcast, in particular, unpacking masculinity and mental health, using movies, video games, culture, comic books, anime, and using that as a way to pull in these larger stories and support folks in examining the ways that we put these masks on. I just thought, hey, that's incredible, because for some folks who may not have access to these conversations or may not be interested in having these conversations, using these mediums as a way to talk about it in the ways we've been conditioned to put up armor around being vulnerable, using these mediums as a way to have real conversations and reflections about it. I think it's just incredible because it can speak to whole groups of folks who consume this art and these stories and may not always dig deeper into like, all right, well, wait a minute, this is reflective of some things that are going on in life. And some people do, but then some folks who don't, who, if you were to come up to them outright and say, let's have a conversation around toxic masculinity, might balk at that. But it's like, well, wait a minute. Okay, let's explore it through these characters and through this. and the importance of mental health and taking off the mask that we wear. Appreciated that part of your show and how you engage with folks. You may have shared this in some of your storytelling already, but I also think of the We Wear the Masks poem, Paul Laurence Dunbar.
Yep, I
Does that
included
have
that.
any significance to your, I don't know if I asked you about, like, how did you come to naming it the mask we wear or anything? I don't know if that's necessarily related, but I definitely think of the poem when I hear the name of
Yep.
your podcast. So any significance there?
Oh, so actually, that's why I lit up when you said that, because I had recited it in the first episode or whatnot and talked about that with my own experiences as, Black male, because that's how he was referring when related to his experience, but also just universally to everybody, like how we all wear masks to hide and to just show that we're okay and we're all right. Or, just masks that we all wear masks and just convey emotions to convey these, different expressions and, images of ourselves for perception. And I think for me, just I thought I kind of came up with the name and then thought to include the poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar in the episode. But I was just thinking the mask we wear, because I feel that, like, as I said before, I feel like as a society, we all wear masks to survive, to heal, to hide, to laugh. And I think that's what inspired me, just thinking of that, like that concept. And then, like, to connect the dots, the poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar kind of solidify that, and like listening and reciting that poem kind of has some meaning to me, and I could definitely relate to that. I'm sure everybody can, from what he was saying.
Okay, so now I have 3 question prompts that I will ask you. Finish the statement. It's just a snapshot in time, just whatever's
Yeah,
on your mind right now. I talk to folks like I can
gotcha.
ask you the same thing months from now, whatever. Your answer might be different, but just at least a snapshot right now. I'll say a thing and then you just finish the sentence, however long or short you need it to be. True social justice is possible when.
Everyone is on a unified front.
Okay, so my approach to social justice is shaped by
This is my community.
understanding and sharing our social justice origin stories is important because
It allows us to connect, to inspire, to empower, and to heal, in a sense, with each other.
what would you hope listeners would learn or take away from the story you've shared today? And then what actions would you encourage them to take?
Well, I would encourage the action them to take to be able to spread awareness to the different issues I address on my podcast, whether it's mental health, neurodiversity, racism, different isms. I hope that it would allow them to spread awareness. I hope that it would allow them to promote conversation amongst each other. I also hope that it will allow people to inspire them to create their own, like, work of art, their own project, which are reflecting upon their identity. It's definitely one difficult question. I feel that I would want people to take away from my story is maybe not to sympathize or feel pity or anything, but to just be able to see that, hey, I'm just like you. We're all human. We all have things. We all have issues. We all have inner demons, but we also have aspirations. We also have optimism. We also have hope. We also have love, to be able to absorb my story, understand it, interpret it, and maybe being able to empathize and sympathize with another person, or empathize and sympathize just with life in general.
Thank you. My honest hope here is that these stories, these messages will last longer than we do. And so for future generations who may come across this recording, this is thinking into the future, many years from now, is there anything, any knowledge, any wisdom, any sharing, just anything? Is there anything that you'd want to pass on to them, and what would you want them to know? Future generations tuning in, listening, somehow come across this recording, what would you want to share with them?
I'd want them to continue the cycle, continue the legacy that we've planted out for them, whichever way they see fit, just to keep that cycle going. Because we, as the youth, as they say, are the futures of the world. I forgot how they say it, but pretty much the idea that, like, we are the future, youth are the future, and just the future generations being able to continue what we've laid and put out.
All right. With that, I'll say thank you so much for being here. Thank you for reaching out to me. I'm glad to have met you. I'm looking forward to staying in contact and seeing
Definitely.
the continued growth of the mask we wear and other projects that you do too. You know, Quincy has a website. There's all sorts of examples of different bodies of work that he's put out there, audio, video, poetry, as you've shared too. So looking forward to your continued growth. Like, I feel like I'm getting in at a really good time. And like I'll tell people this too sometimes. It's like, I won't use your name to get into rooms, but what I feel good about is being here at this time when you're building and growing this project. I think it is something so significant and so necessary and so needed. And I'm glad that you joined me to talk about some of the messaging, some of the narrative, some of the storytelling that you're putting out into the world to support us all in thinking about how this stuff connects to us and our role and our relationship with it. And so, yeah, just thank you so much for reaching out. I'm glad we met. And
For having me.
yeah.
Definitely.
All right. Quincy M. Simmons. Quincy M. Simmons. Thank you all. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and subscribe to Social Justice Origin Stories wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch video episodes on YouTube at Social Justice Origin Stories, and I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. Video episodes are also available on the project website, socialjusticeoriginstories.com. I'd love to hear about how you're engaging with the stories. Share your thoughts at socialjusticeoriginstories.com/contact or by emailing stories@socialjusticeoriginstories.com. To support the work of Social Justice Origin Stories, consider becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep this research going and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories to learn more and to make a contribution. Again, that's patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories. You can start or stop anytime. Social Justice Origin Stories is edited, hosted, and produced by me, Rolando Thompkins-Jones. Many thanks to our storyteller this week and the many storytellers who have contributed to this project. And thank you for joining me this week. Take care.